welcome to the second in our Cleantech Conversations, which is the online event series by the National Cleantech Conference. My name is Tiffany Bauer and I'm the Program Director for the National Cleantech Conference and Exhibition, which is taking place in Brisbane in March 2021. Just letting people log in, just watching everyone, all those numbers go up there, but just while we're waiting, a quick little welcome and introduction and some housekeeping. Today we are discussing building back better. What does COVID-19 mean for Cleantech? We have a fantastic lineup of Australian industry experts and thought leaders with us today. So I'm pleased to introduce our facilitator, Paul Hodgson, who is the GM for Innovation and Stakeholder Engagement at the National Energy Resources Australia. Paul will be facilitating the conversation today, and Paul is also an advisory panel member for the National Cleantech Conference and Exhibition. So Paul, thank you. We really appreciate you facilitating this conversation today. Just some quick housekeeping. This session will be recorded and the recording will be uploaded post-event for everyone to access. We welcome questions, and these can be entered into the Q&A section by clicking on the icon at the bottom of your screen. We'll endeavour to answer these throughout the session, and any that we don't get to, we will follow up with post-event. Just also to note, we've got a couple of live polls that will come up on screen during the session. You'll have about 20 seconds to answer these and the results will be displayed immediately. So it's not too much thought required. We're just really running those just to get a bit of a feeling for who's in our audience and also what the thoughts of the industry are at the moment. So this session will run for approximately 45 minutes and we'll have some additional time for Q&A, but we do want to be wrapped up by 1:30. So without further ado, Paul, if I can hand over to you and you can introduce our panelists.
Thank you very much, Tiffany, and look, welcome everyone. And this is a very exciting topic and what a great panel we have here. Building back better, what does COVID-19 mean for Cleantech? It's what extraordinary times we're in. There's been a lot written, and I was just looking at the International Energy Agency energy investment data for the last couple of weeks. It looks like energy investment across the world is going to be down 20% this year. CO2 emissions are going to be down 8% back to levels of 10 years ago. But $1 trillion less will be spent in oil. They're projecting this year, $400 million in electricity. It really is a potentially, I've heard it called the Great Pause. It's perhaps a time to reset, time to take a deep breath, and time to think about what we're investing in. So this is a great session. And I'll let the panel introduce themselves, but really we couldn't put together a better group of people, I think, to really address this topic today. We've got Dr. Sarah Pearson, who's the head of Advanced Queensland, the Queensland Government's Innovation Initiative, and with a distinguished career in innovation, in universities, in companies, in innovation networks, and in government. We've got Stephen Robertson, who has a distinguished parliamentary career and a former minister in Queensland for a number of years, but included energy in his portfolios. He's now stakeholder engagement and strategy director for Planet Arc Power, with one of Australia's global award-winning clean tech companies. And we've got Mr. Cleantech himself, John O'Brien, who started the Australian Cleantech Forum 13 years ago, founder of the Australian Technologies Competition, and now with global professional services firm Deloitte, advising them on decarbonisation and climate change. So fantastic. So I'll throw first to Sarah. Sarah, if you'd like to just perhaps tell us a little bit more about and what your opening thoughts might be on this topic.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Paul, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I think it's always been the time to talk about clean tech, and will be, but it's a very, very good time to be talking about it right now. And I know we'll be just exploring that later on. Really, obviously, strongly supportive, and the Queensland Government is very supportive to the degree that we have a range of programs and policies that support it. And also, we're really excited to be sponsoring the Cleantech Conference for March 2021. So really thrilled to be part of that. Part of Cleantech that's really important is the innovation piece. So how do you create the innovation environment to make sure that Cleantech can really thrive? And of course, Queensland has been involved in this for decades as part of the smart city and then through to advanced Queensland. I can take no credit for that. I've only been here 4 months, but as a state, you really stand out in Australia as supporting innovation, which is an important backbone for Cleantech. And obviously, of course, the Queensland government has other broader sustainability priorities, such as their 50% renewable energy target by 2030, and support the development of hydrogen and biofutures industries, as well as trying to position Queensland as an electric vehicle capital. So there's quite a few big pieces that government is trying to do to help build back better, which obviously had that opportunity through COVID. In COVID, it's really shown the importance of innovation. So a lot of the science and technology that goes into helping us survive through COVID has been incredibly important. And I think that helps build the timing for now, because there's a lot more support for science and technology, as we've seen how important it's been throughout this crisis we've been going through. And of course, this global transition to a circular economy gives us incredible opportunities to build back better. It's a global movement that's going on. The Advanced Queensland strategy has a range of ways that we can help, talking about the convergence of big data and analytics, robotics, manufacturing technologies leading to smarter factories. There's a lot of opportunities for us to bring things together. We've also just joined with the Department of State Development, which is really exciting to have the two together, have state development and innovation together. And in state development, they have the Resource Recovery Industry Development Program, $100 million that is being invested in new facilities, landfill diversion, technical studies. And of course, they have their roadmaps, and the hydrogen roadmap is one of those. So I guess the point is there's been a lot of work that's gone on for the last couple of decades. We're now in this great position where we can really, really leverage that and build back much better during and post-COVID. So it's an exciting time to be part of this.
Certainly exciting time, Sarah. Thanks very much for that. Stephen, you want to opening few thoughts?
Thanks, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to participate in this forum, because it's actually very timely, because just last week, on behalf of 13 Cleantech Smart Energy Efficiency Queensland companies, we actually presented to the Premier this submission, which is a Queensland Renewable Energy and Smart Energy Efficiency Recovery Roadmap. And in that document, there are quite a number of suggestions, recommendations on how we can use recovery strategy to invest in projects and undertake activities that ensures that we don't drop the ball when it comes to our climate change and emissions reduction targets, but at the same time, using those opportunities to create the next generation jobs and a range of other outputs or outcomes that sit firmly under the banner of sustainability. And so today's forum, I think, is a great opportunity for us to exchange some of those ideas. I think it's important to state that this strategy that we put forward to the Premier and the Queensland Government doesn't rely on millions or indeed billions of dollars being invested. Rather, we tried to think a bit more laterally, a bit smarter about what government can facilitate. For example, we often say in our space that when companies like ourselves tender for government contracts to install, say, 100 kilowatt solar panels on a community hall somewhere, companies like us will always miss out on those projects. Why? Because the way those tenders get structured, it's based on lowest price, and those companies that operate with large throughput but low margins will tend to pick up that work, whereas companies that reinvest their profits into R&D, such as Planet Arc Power and others, we can't compete just on price alone. So educating procurement officers, both across government and in the private sector, about what technologies are out there, what value add can be brought to the table for whether it be a rooftop solar installation or an energy efficiency project. That education, we think, is critical in terms of coming up with allowing the whole sector to participate in recovery strategies. So I'm hoping that we'll have the opportunity to discuss a bit more about that today.
Yep. Okay. Thanks very much, Stephen. I'm sure we'll come back to that. I mean, one thing is how do we get the clean investment happening, but then also how do the supply chains and the suppliers in the clean tech sector in Australia benefit from that? Simon Corbell did a great piece from Energy Estate in The Guardian yesterday around that particular topic, and I'm sure it'll come up either in a question or it'll come up in the discussion later. But John, have you got some opening thoughts, particularly as you reflect on this particular period?
Yeah, certainly. And my time with Australian Cleantech over sort of 10 or 11 years through that time, I think it's really interesting, sort of my changing role, but also how the sector has changed through that time. So, you know, there was sort of 10 years there of working with developing technologies and helping bring them through. And how do you take a smart technology and make it commercial when it's still pretty expensive? And it's now really more about deployment. So and that's the really exciting bit. You know, we spent a lot of time. There's still more technologies coming through, but it's really about deployment and the work we're seeing with some of the Australia and the world's biggest companies is really about how do we roll this stuff out quickly. And then some of the other stuff, sort of looking back, there's the Cleantech Index, which still gets published, tracks 90 or so cleantech companies. For years was a good reason not to invest in cleantech. How do you lose money? It's like invest in cleantech, but it's outperformed the ASX for the last 6 years straight, and it's continuing, and it didn't get hit as hard in this downturn just recently as well. So I think there's some very strong financial targets there. So the work I'm doing currently is around deployment. It's around doing sort of decarbonisation strategies for the largest global diversified miners and energy transition for the oil companies, and then a whole lot of other corporates, and the opportunity for the technologies we're going to be talking about really to actually start rolling out into those large organizations. Is the demand there is massive. And I think one of the really kind of big changes I've seen in the last couple of years has been, it was always a struggle when I was doing the cleantech networks with I think my greatest achievement maybe as Australian Cleantech is I did provide free beer for 10,000 people over 10 years. But it was a real struggle to get industry and customers in the room. It was always, kind of the sector talking to itself. What we're finding now is the conversation with the big corporates and governments as well. It's changed from the sustainability manager pushing stuff to it's the CFO, it's the board, and it's the CEO. This is all about finance, and it's how this is a critical financial issue. And it's I need the sustainability manager to interpret some stuff for me, but actually this is all about finance, and that's the discussions we're having now. And that's that's the sort of the evolution of the sector over those last 10 years.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Thanks, John. Stephen, just going to ask, we've had a question from the audience, just a quick one about the roadmap that you talked about that's been presented to the Queensland government. Is that publicly available? Or could you make it publicly available? Yeah.
But we certainly can, and I'll discuss that with Tiffany offline as to how we facilitate that.
Fantastic. Okay, well, that was the first question we had. So in terms of the changes that we're seeing in energy demand globally and therefore subsequently energy investment and energy spending, I think there's two schools of thought about where this might go. With with oil price plummeting and potentially coal prices plummeting as well. I mean, does it change? Are there people that you think will go, well, actually, it's much better for us to invest in oil? Maybe things are too big economically that really we should put off this emissions reduction. We should put off moving the clean economy forward. And then there's others that actually say, well, let's not waste a good crisis. And if we're looking at transitioning infrastructure, we're looking at transitioning both business models in energy and the circular economy. If governments are going to be putting money in, why don't we do that? But which way do you see this might go? I mean, it's a vexed question, I suspect, but maybe we'll start with you, Stephen.
Look, in my mind, it's not so vexed. It depends what you see as the future. If your future is one where we need to prioritise significant reductions in carbon emissions in order to sustain this planet that we live on, then a short-term dip in oil prices, whilst maybe there may be opportunities there for some sectors of the economy to benefit from that. But ultimately, if the goal is long-term sustainability of our planet, then we can't afford to take our foot off the accelerator in the transition to a clean energy future.
Yeah. Okay, Sarah, you've got some thoughts on?
Yeah, look, I don't know about you, but I feel like the world is becoming exponentially complex. And these things are, I mean, look at what's going on in the US right now. I mean, on the top of COVID and after we've had all the fires, it just feels like everything's gone mad. And I don't think I personally feel there aren't any simple solutions or simple answers to these things. I mean, for instance, if you look at consumer behavior and consumer desires, people are going, look at India. You can actually see across the city in India now, or in the Italian canals. So you've actually got fish and dolphins in the Italian canals. You know, we're experiencing that here. What does that mean? If consumers are feeling that way and are seeing that, is that really hitting them hard enough for them to want to change their behavior? Travel. What on earth is going to happen with travel? Even just going from home to work, what's going to happen there? Are we going to be using our cars more because no one wants to get on public transport? Or are we going to be, you know, how's all that going to work? So I guess I'm saying I don't know the answer, and I think it's quite complex. There are a lot of pieces, and we need someone with complex analysis skills to really look at it all to come up with something sensible from it all. But yeah, it's complex.
Yeah, and John, I assume, I mean, you talked about how it's really economic arguments now for a lot of CFOs, a lot of companies, and for governments as well. So how do you see it playing out?
So, I mean, it is interesting sort of talking to the big companies. So probably the short-term impacts is maybe, you know, CapEx decisions that were going to be spent in the next, you know, sort of 3-6 months, maybe they're being delayed. But actually what the opportunity is, because things have been moving so quickly for the corporates, because they were quite late to the game maybe, but they're actually managing to step back and take a bit more of a strategic view of, okay, how do we do this to create competitive advantage? How do we do this to make sure that our products are in demand? Whereas it has been, you know, a little bit sort of, you know, reactive in terms of, we've got an AGM coming up, we're going to be hammered, you know, we've got to do something. So in some ways, the big companies are stepping back and taking a more strategic view around, okay, how do we do this and how do we plan this for 10 years? Because we're going to, you know, this is going to be tens of billions of dollars of capex we're going to spend on our operations to decarbonize them. So we're certainly sort of seeing that. I mean, in terms of the energy sector specifically, I mean, there's some really interesting sort of stats we were looking at recently. So, you know, total demand is down about sort of 5% or so, not massively, depending on where you are, but massively changed usage patterns. So, you know, it's kind of, you know, we're all sitting in our home offices, and going forward, does that, more people are going to be sitting in home offices, but the offices are going to be powered as well. So does that actually mean there's more energy being used? The wholesale price market, you know, is down, you know, 40-50%, you know, variable, but it's kind of massively down. So that has impacts. The other one is the hardship programs, and you know, that's a percentage of customers on hardship programs has kind of gone from 1% to 3% in the last little while. And that's going to have a massive knock-on effect as, you know, potentially some of the second-tier retailers run out of money, you know, as more, you know, less cash coming into that system, and suddenly, you know, you lose competition within the energy sector, and that, you know, the knock-on effects of that's, you know, maybe not great. And I mean, the other really interesting thing, I think, energy-wise particularly, you know, if everyone's actually consuming their rooftop solar, it's not going back into the grid. Actually the variability of the grid is kind of changes, and does that, you know, undermine the business case for the peakers, you know, the gas peakers. So there's all sorts of impacts which, you know, yeah, no way to know which way it's going, but there's a whole lot of change coming through the energy sector particularly.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Look, we've had a question. I mean, it's quite interesting to me. The renewables in Australia has often been associated very much with electricity. And particularly grid electricity. And we've had a question about the diesel, and particularly diesel is still pretty expensive in regions. Australia's a large user of diesel. We have a very large multi-billion-dollar cost to government of diesel fuel rebate. In terms of, and even, you know, 66% of Australia's emissions are outside the electricity sector. great opportunity potentially in renewable diesel, whether it's biodiesel or whether it's looking at alternatives in electrification, or whether it's looking at things like green hydrogen or green ammonia to drive some of those. Anyone want to comment on where they see that kind of market might go? And I should also say that we've also got fuel security issues in Australia as well. And I think the Australian government's just decided to buy about $100 million of fuel, which is going to sit in the US. So you know, interesting times for the diesel and the oil and the fuel, those sort of markets.
I'm happy to start with that one, and having fuel sitting in the US doesn't seem to impact security in my mind. But I mean, we've done a lot of work on. We did all the modelling for the National Hydrogen Strategy. We're doing the bioenergy roadmap for ARENA at the moment. So with partners at NERA, yeah, there's so much more than just, you know, to energy than electricity, and there's actually so much more to clean tech than just energy. So, you know, we shouldn't lose sight of that. But certainly, the electrification of everything, which is kind of one scenario, is probably not the most economic way to go. We've got to have, you know, horses for courses. We need, you know, hard to abate sectors. We're going to have hydrogen or biofuels or, you know, bioenergy, industrial heat from bioenergy, massive opportunity. Aviation fuels, you know, huge problem. How are we going to solve that? So definitely this has to be beyond renewable electrons. You know, it can be renewable molecules maybe, but we need to think pretty broadly, and as I say, beyond energy as well.
Yeah. Sarah or Stephen?
I'd just like to add that there's obviously, as you were saying, great opportunities for the regions. If you think about the biofuels, and Queensland being such a great agricultural state, lots of opportunity for the biofuels, which I know you've been investing in for some time, and are being utilised quite widespread. The hydrogen piece is going to be interesting, John, because I think a lot of states want to play in this field. Oh, yeah. And that's obviously not from just the perspective of Australia, but it's incredible export market to Japan and South Korea, for instance, and Germany and others. So I'm going to be really curious to see where we land on that. I'd love to see Queensland taking a big leadership role in that. I mean, Gladstone is obviously a great spot for having that, and I think all the bits and pieces that you need to bring together, that they've got them there. So I think we've got a massive opportunity. I think also just we've got to remember that battery storage, that's something we really need to keep working on. And my understanding is Queensland's got quite an advanced research capability within battery storage, and I know people are looking at trying to do that more from a clean tech perspective. Aligned with that is data. So if we want to be an AI state, if we want to play really big in the artificial intelligence, we're going to have to store a lot of data. And with the way the world's going at the moment, you know, obviously data security is going to be a massive part of that. So data centers, and again, there'll be huge energy needs for that. So again, there's an opportunity, I think, for Queensland to be not only an AI leader, but a green, clean AI leader, which would be a bit of a competitive advantage around the world. We could really make the most of.
And that's where government really does play an important role. And that is bringing we have tremendous capabilities here in Queensland, simply natural capabilities because of our geographic diversity. So setting up regional test beds where you can use or bring to the table a range of technologies that can be made fit for purpose for different environments, whether it be in the tropics, whether it be out in the far west in the Channel country, whether it be on remote islands and remote communities. Those test bed opportunities facilitated by government allows you to increase your skills base here in Queensland that can then be taken to the world. If we developed, for example, particular capabilities in remote clean energy generation and natural disaster resiliency across, for example, Indigenous communities, remote Indigenous communities and island communities, well, that's a skill set that you can then take, for example, to Pacific Island countries. So you actually set up an export market, capabilities in the kinds of services that those island nations are crying out for. and that's a role that government can play well in facilitating by bringing different players together in different parts of the state.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I mean, my understanding is that people around the world look to Australia as a test bed for new energy solutions, because we're a great market to do your testing in. So I think that's another sort of competitive advantage we should be drawing together. The other point is that this needs to be not even just a state, but the state collaborating with a private sector, but also with the federal government. In my previous role, I was at DFAT, and we were involved in helping the Pacific Islands to build new energy facilities, biodigesters, for instance. And you can actually help the Pacific Islands to build whole new industries as well, based on your IP and your experience and your piloting, prototyping that you're doing here. So, and that builds a whole lot of peace, prosperity, and security for us in the region, which is obviously very key for us.
Yeah. Questions are coming thick and fast. So if you don't mind, we'll keep going. So we'll try and get through as many as we can. I've had a question actually about regional skills, and particularly that a lot of the new Cleantech skills are quite easily transferable from particularly the fossil fuel sector, but from the traditional sectors. And I think there's a real opportunity in the regions. A lot of Cleantech resources, a lot of Cleantech capability, and in fact, almost a renewed independence of regions around energy and around materials and around jobs and skills. So maybe if someone would like to comment on how do we convince people that, and convince governments, I guess, that there's not this yawning gap, and that potentially it's a diversification rather than just a transition argument for regions anyway. Maybe John, you didn't get a word in on the last one, so maybe you'd like to start with this one.
Oh, I started off on the last one, okay. And actually, just to finish off that discussion, I think one of the challenges with hydrogen is around the focus on exports, and we have to build a domestic sector first and industrial hubs around that, and that will enable an export industry. And I think it's dangerous to look at export too early on that. In terms of regions, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at where are the opportunities, and there's probably two sort of major ones around obviously energy, and that's that's wind and solar, but also bioenergy as well. That's absolutely regional, and has massive opportunity to actually sort of drive the rest of what's happening in the economy. I think the other one is also the offset market. So I work nationally, but in Queensland, obviously there's the Land Restoration Fund, and other around the country, other offset mechanisms, and the demand we're seeing or nascent demand from corporates to offset difficult emissions, and they're going to they are making ambitious 2030 targets, and we're going to see some more in the next few weeks, and they're going to, you can abate pretty easily with buying renewable energy for some stuff, but it starts getting pretty hard pretty quickly. So the offset market is going to boom, and that is entirely around the agricultural sector. It's about regional centres. It's so there's massive opportunities there, both with the renewable energy and the offset market, and it's just the two easy wins. So I think it's going to be a critical part of the solution.
Yeah, thanks.
Can I jump in on the skills piece?
Sure.
Because it's a fascinating piece. We had some work done across the Indo-Pacific, because if you think about how those countries are developing, it's all through low cost manufacturing, which is being overcome by Industry 4.0. So we did a piece around, so what is the skills translation that needs to happen? And it was really surprising how many of the current skills, what they did, they took current jobs and said, okay, you need to be able to do this, this, and this as part of your job. As part of a future job, you need to be this, this, and this. There actually wasn't as much of a mismatch as I thought, which was really, really encouraging. So I think your piece around that, there's this translation capability is great. Yesterday I was talking to the Gilmore boys. I don't find it offensive that I call them that. I really, really love the Gilmore boys. Gilmore Space Tech Industries down in Gold Coast. And we were talking about how they need to build an ecosystem around them, a supply chain ecosystem. And we were saying, okay, well, let's have a look at the sorts of skills that you need. I mean, they need welders. So I'd love to see some sort of a map where we look at the new industries and the current industries. What are some of the supply chain pieces and the skills in those supply chains that are so obviously transferable, like welding? If you're going to build any sort of facility, welding is going to be needed. Now, I might be doing the government a disservice. I've only been here 4 months. So maybe we're already doing that. But I think it's not as bad as perhaps people think it's going to be in terms of that translation of jobs.
Yeah.
Having said that, we need a lot more people studying STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths, so we can be building these new industries.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think Sarah, you that clustering or that building an ecosystem and a community around it, the sort of stuff that John was doing with the Australian Cleantech from 2007 is really important, and we're starting to see a bit more cluster activity. I know the Victorian Cleantech cluster is up and running. There's the South Regional Renewable Energy Excellence in southern New South Wales and Canberra. We're seeing hydrogen technology clusters forming around the country. I think we really need to do that. I mean, we look to Europe. Europe's got 3,000 clusters. That ability to build quality and scale and to kind of create these communities, I think, will be really vital for the supply chain. Stephen, did you want to say something on skills?
Just to support exactly what Sarah said, interestingly, the points that Sarah's made was made by one of the companies that put their name to our recovery strategy. They were arguing that it isn't as difficult as you might think, and using that example of listing what the skills of the future are compared to what the skills required today, there is a lot of complementarity to that. Yes, there are some additional, perhaps in the ICT area, skills that need to be bolted on, but it's not an impossible task. So if you're committed to principles of just transition, then that's one of the pathways that you can take by really getting in and doing the hard yards to recognise existing skills and what you need to do to transition to the skills for the next 10, 20, 30 years, and start investing in your vocational education sector to make that a reality. So I guess what I'm saying is, in terms of what Sarah's outlined, that has the support of certainly some of the companies that put their name to our submission.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that, I mean, I think what often gets lost in that discussion as well is that the traditional industries' skills are changing. So they're going towards machine learning and AI and greater cobots and robots and automation and the like. And so there's a change coming anyway in skilling. Perhaps there was always a change coming, but at the moment it perhaps seems that it's an accelerated change that's coming, and it's not just a case of people who are, considering their role for the next 20 years, or they can be reefed out into this new world. It's actually it's not as simple as that. Sarah, I think you had something to say.
No, I was just going to say.
Oh, you were just agreeing with it.
I was agreeing, and I just was reminded back in the day when I used to be a physics lecturer. I used to lecture to some biophysics students who were not really physics students, and they were terrified. And I used to say to them, you know what? This has all been designed by humans for humans. So you're a human, you can do that. I know that's simplifying things, but I think when we say the words like AI and robotics, people go, oh my God, I've got to be a rocket scientist or something. And we absolutely do need rocket scientists, but still there's some of it which isn't quite as hard as perhaps it's portrayed.
Yeah. And I've just been reminded by the audience that the Sunshine Coast has had a Cleantech cluster since 2007, and so not an inclusive list, but there's a lot of activity around. And the Sunshine Coast has been doing some fantastic stuff over many years in clean technology.
Paul, just on the sort of the modernisation of industry. So one of the really interesting things with one of our mining clients has been around thinking around the interconnection between automation and decarbonisation, and effectively an automated electrified mine is much easier to decarbonise, and a decarbonised mine is easier to automate, and there's a massive overlap there in terms of, and that, that's sort of doing mine sites, but it's effectively the same everywhere. So the more, and automation has some bad impacts on and potentially on employment, but they're massively interconnected, and the data needed to across both of them, and Industry 4.0 is exactly the same data you need to effectively decarbonise and make the right financial decisions. So those two things will integrate massively in the next 2 or 3 years, I think.
Excellent. And look, we've got a question. I think we're a great question on energy efficiency. I mean, is reduce before produce a strong consideration with energy improvements? We're talking about I was talking about earlier about the investments that get made. But is there, if we embrace energy efficiency a bit more, maybe we don't need to build as much infrastructure, and maybe that's an overall saving. And particularly in the artificial intelligence, machine learning type space as well, maybe there is going to be a renewed ability to do energy efficiency in a grand scale. So does anyone want to comment on energy efficiency in this? A lot of clean tech companies are in the energy efficiency space as well.
I'll jump in, but it's my view, demand management and energy efficiency is actually the glue that will hold together. How do we go to 100% renewables? We have to have a completely dynamic, intelligent, responsive system in terms of electricity, but actually all forms of energy, to enable us to have variable generation. We have to have variable demand. And I, by 2030, we will almost without fail, I reckon every part of our system will have demand response on it. Every house, every factory, and there'll be some things you can't turn down, but pretty much everything you can, and it'll all be dynamic, and that will be what will enable the sort of full energy transition to happen.
Yep.
Just quickly, I remember about 10 years ago, I think it was McKinsey did that study and around energy use and transition, and I think it was something like 40% of our reduction in energy could come from energy efficiency. I remember looking at that number going, oh my goodness, you mean just turn the light off like my dad used to tell me.
And profitably
so that was,
as well.
Yes, which was really surprising. But also there's some really great technology around that's helping with all of this, and AI will obviously be a big part of it. There's one company that they have sensors all around your office building, and it actually learns where people tend to go at what times of day, so you can turn the aircon and the lights and all the rest of it on and off according to that. So there's a fair bit out, and that's something I think to remember, that we might think about what we want to do, but the techies, they'll just push ahead with a lot of this great stuff, and if it's got a market, people will buy it, and that'll drive some change.
Yeah, and I think taking the human intervention out of energy efficiency will be really key to that. So people looking at smart meters, or turning off lights, or turning on lights, or turning on the heating. In busy lives, it's really hard for people to do that, to keep remembering to do it. They're not energy traders. It's not their day job. But having the artificial intelligence and machine learning that we already see in online retail and everything else happening in the energy sector will be huge. Stephen, any comments from you?
Paul, I'll say exactly what you just said. I well remember when that first generation of energy efficiency technologies became or tried to become popularized, and it did exactly what you were saying. It required humans to continue to monitor some sort of gizmo on their kitchen bench as to what their energy usage was. And I never quite got it that I would want to spend my life looking at some a dial or a display on my kitchen bench. So taking that side out of it and automating it, and that's where we are now. I mean, the technology development in this space is just so rapid that it doesn't require us to monitor anymore because of advances in AI, etc.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Next question is around biogas, actually, saying it's not hugely popular in Australia. Only a few companies are doing it, even though it's old technology. And we, send landfills about 40%. What prospects do you see biogas at the community and commercial level happening? Perhaps the whole waste to energy, waste to materials, new materials, circular economy side of things. Anyone want to have a stab at that one?
I guess in the middle of helping pull together the bioenergy roadmap, which is really all around that. So, again, how do you decarbonise the whole economy? You either, one of the challenges is gas. So you either end up not using gas and write off billions of dollars of pipeline assets, which the owners of those assets are not going to be happy about doing, or you put some low emissions gas in there, and hydrogen obviously has had plenty of airtime. That may be a longer term. You can do 10% or so immediately, but it's harder to go to 100%. Biogas is there's no changes to anything. So So that potentially is an opportunity where we can actually decarbonise the gas network. And waste to energy is an area which is often hotly disputed and is used widely elsewhere. There's some social license issues around that, often not overly, the worries are often not necessarily founded on science, but there's an education process that needs to go on there, and certainly you don't just chuck everything in and burn it, but there's an appropriate level of energy to waste, which I think is an important part of the solution as well.
Thanks, John. Sarah, Stephen, anything on biogas? No. I mean, I think the interesting thing is hopefully we're seeing an increase in waste as just another resource, and I think we're seeing integrated energy and material models, which are very exciting. In the renewable hydrogen one, I'm looking at technologies that are taking hydrogen out of wastewater and potentially injecting oxygen back in, which is actually dropping the overall costs of running the wastewater treatment plant, because increased oxygen in the water has a beneficial effect. So and then potentially the hydrogens fueling the local bus fleet, because the new bus depot is going to be next to the wastewater treatment plant, et cetera, and solar panels on the building, and so you get this much more of an integrated model, and people really aren't looking at anything as a waste. A waste is just an opportunity to do something with it. And I think the fact that a number of countries stopped taking Australia's waste has allowed us to potentially grow an industry off the back of that. One which has been there and has been plugging away for a while, but it could be a fantastic opportunity.
Can I just quickly add in, from the corporate perspective, it's got to be easy. Whatever it is, you've got the choice. I flip a switch, or I do something complex. So I'm thinking about Cadbury. So Cadbury had a lot of chocolate that it was wasting and was being thrown away. So you could use that to generate energy. And so there was talk about doing it, but it just all got so complex. We went, I just want to flick a switch. So when you're talking to large corporates, there's all that convenience as well that goes with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple of other questions. So question here around, isn't the biggest hurdle for project implementation the funding, both private and government? I suspect private or government funding is a really big hurdle, but I guess maybe that's a point for the panel to just have a chat about where the financing comes for some of these projects, who's making those decisions, and what those flows might look like.
Well, I think we're in a really interesting time in how investors, particularly superannuation funds, are looking for opportunities as part of their corporate social responsibilities, looking at opportunities to invest in the clean tech sector. But of course, they need to earn the appropriate return on behalf of their members. That's why we're really excited about a flagship project we're about to launch with an international furniture retailer interstate, where we'll be putting 1.5 megawatts of solar on roofs, partnered with a 3.4 megawatt battery and our Alexis technology platform that allows for the uninterrupted export of surplus energy into the network. What's interesting, apart from our technology, which is world leading, is that a superannuation fund has come on board to actually own the 1.5 megawatt solar array. Why? Because once you get over that problem of curtailment by network operators, you in effect de-risk the project from you can increase the certainty of return for your investment. And so the superannuation fund has come on board to actually own the solar array because they'll be getting their appropriate return on behalf of their members. So once you start being able to offer solutions that do provide that return, then it opens up vast opportunities for new investors to come on board, particularly those with strong commitment to their own social and environmental responsibilities.
Yeah. Now, look, I think that goes back to John's point. I think very much around the economics and the CFOs and I mean, if this is, I think the ultimate aim of all of this should be to to drive a return, to drive an economic outcome. I think it's any clean tech company is going to be on much safer ground. I've worked with clean tech companies for a couple of decades, and if you can make that business case work, if you can make a payback period which is reasonable, and the other things, the emissions reduction, the reputation, the employee engagement, and everything else that goes with it is positive as well, then they're all icing on the cake.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Paul. I mean, and Stephen. I mean, there's plenty of money around, but you've got to understand what that money needs, and it's hard for early stage technologies, and that's where there are government programs both at state and federal level to assist with that. Many of the clean tech entrepreneurs I've worked with over the years have not managed to raise the money that they felt that they needed and felt they deserved, maybe. The overriding, if you can find a way to create value, and it's not just about fuel switching, or it's just you've got to think really creatively about how do you create multiple value streams and create a value stack that makes a project commercial, reduces risk, and then there's lots of money there. I mean, there's if you can get it right, money investment is not a problem. It's just getting the business model right and reducing that risk to the extent that people with money are happy to back you.
Yeah.
Could I just add to that? I think it's great that there is money around. I think money likes obviously return on investment, but it likes to see the route to market too. And I think that collaboration between big business and the small business with the ideas is a really great way of getting that route to market, or the big business and the researchers, so that right at the beginning, when the research is done around what this clean tech could be, that it's clear how it might get to market. I think that's important. I think in terms of and obviously government funding, as you said, it plays in the de-risk space, so that early stage stuff. But if it can be done very much in collaboration with the research and the industry, I think that's very valuable. I think also in some of these new techs, there's technologies can make the most, and they do make the most of the state rivalries, and that's another place where the state funding comes in. If a state's really serious about trying to get an industry into its state, then it usually has to make it a little bit sweet somehow. So that's another piece of the puzzle, is the early stage de-risking, and then how do we actually, for instance, build? It doesn't even have any money. It could just, how do we build an ecosystem around this technology that will build the whole industry, and government's a good convener, I think, in that space.
Yeah, and just we've had a question which I think quite relates, but it'd be good just to have a chat about it, which is, in this sort of this COVID-19 world and in the post-COVID-19 world, in terms of accessing funding for potentially clean tech startups and scale-ups, any new challenges do you think? Do you think the financiers, the typical financiers, are going to be, there may be money out there, but it's a bit like, will I be able to access it? Do you think there's going to be challenges in some of that, perhaps venture capital or even sort of loan financing in that tech space?
May or may not be. It's interesting. I mean, there's people are saying that within this COVID downturn, we need to make sure we're keeping the pipeline going. So we need to make sure that someone is supporting that early, de-risking or high risky activity. So I know that we're going to continue to do that through Advanced Queensland. We'll help with that. But then you'll still see that the valley of death will just move. So I think that current, what I'm seeing from investment capital, is that they are saying, let's look at our portfolio now. We've got a portfolio of investment. We need to really shepherd this and help it get through the COVID, which could be anything up to 2 years. And so a lot of the investment will go to the things that have already been invested in, which is going to make it a bit of a challenge for the new ideas coming through. Having said that, I'm hearing that there's still a fair bit of investment going on. So I think, John, you were saying there's plenty of money out there. There still is money, but I think a fair bit of it is being cautious, but there is still some out there.
And Stephen, you've been through, I mean, I don't want to give away Planet Arc Power's investment strategy, but you've been through multiple rounds. I mean, what are you seeing on the ground? Are you seeing it still people pretty positive, or the dynamics of the venture capital market changing?
We're seeing it. Look, it's tough in the immediate to short term. There's no two ways about that. But again, I join with Sarah. We don't quite know yet what the future is going to look like, particularly in terms of how long is the recovery period. But at the same time, using the example of superannuation funds again, they're still accumulating revenue from their members, and that money has to go somewhere. It can't sit in the bank. You get no return from in a low interest rate environment from just parking it in a bank. So they will still be looking for opportunities to return to get higher returns even in this very difficult environment. So you can see that that's an area which would be positive from a capital raising point of view. But again, what that means for early stage capital raisings, it's just, I think it's just too difficult to tell at this point, at exactly this point in time.
Yeah, and maybe sort of to add to that, the fundamentals of what's a customer's need and how are you meeting it, is unchanged. I think the interesting bit, and if you can demonstrate that, and your, as Sarah was saying, and your route to market and how you de-risk it, and then that those fundamentals are unchanged. What I think is interesting possibly is the disruption that COVID is causing short term and the changes it's going to drive long term for those customers might mean actually you need to pivot what your customer is and what their needs are, because their needs are changing. So in some ways, this any level of disruption creates massive opportunities. So if there's you have a really strong technology, think again about where you are pointing it and think what's changed through COVID that actually might make some other opportunities more viable, and you actually might want to go for those. And then that makes the finance more achievable.
That's a good point, John. I know that, for instance, in Silicon Valley, they're investing heavily in things that have suddenly exploded because of COVID. Yep. So telepresence health, for instance, it's going gangbusters.
Yep.
But another interesting thing that we're seeing is that people are experiencing international marketing in a different way.
Yeah.
They're saying that no one has a face-to-face advantage anymore. So everybody's having to market online and through telepresence. And they're actually finding that to our advantage. So you're right, pivot for the new markets and also think differently about how you're accessing those markets.
And just for my business, it's now much easier to pitch to international clients because it just means I have a late night. I don't have to get on a plane.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, someone's asked a question which I'll probably answer in the interest of time, but it's around the panel thoughts on a technology that combines desalination and renewable power generation. Seeing a number of projects like that in the renewable hydrogen space, particularly using electrolysis and through seawater, using probably large-scale solar and creating renewable power that way. So that's something that I think is happening quite a lot. Australia obviously has a lot of ocean, a lot of salt water around us, and we really didn't get to talk much about the ocean energy industry at all. We're probably running quite, what have we got, about 5 or 6 minutes to go. What I might do is actually just do a round the grounds to the panel. If there's things you thought we didn't cover that we should have, that you've got burning thoughts on this particular subject, some takeaway messages perhaps, some reflections even from the almost hour we've had to discuss today would be useful. I'll go in reverse order this time. I'll go to John first.
Yep, certainly. So I think that the crossover between COVID and sort of decarbonisation, I think we've been trying to do some work recently around thinking about the sectors that have been most impacted by COVID, and then matching them sort of against the sectors that are going to be most impacted by decarbonisation, and there's some that sort of pop out in both. So kind of things like transport and automotive and oil and gas and chemicals, that they're being heavily hit by COVID and potentially have massive carbon risks in there and financial risks of stranded assets and similar. So and power and utilities to some extent. So those are your targets for green recovery projects. That's where the opportunity lies, because they're in disruption now and they've got massive disruption coming. So that's the sort of the area where we're helping to sort of think through how do governments cope with that, and how do industry cope with that. And then they're sort of thinking through, we're kind of trying to do a fair bit of thought leadership out, what's the practicality of green recovery? And in terms of what do you do, immediately around EV charging infrastructure or energy efficiency or LED lights or kind of that sort of thing. And that's the stuff you can do in the next 6 months. Looking a bit further out, it's about renewable energy zones, electrify public transport. How do we get all those government buildings and make virtual power plants out of them? That's it's a no-brainer. It stabilizes the whole network. It's just there. And then long term, how do you actually do some collaboration on hard to abate sectors? So all of that stuff, can come from thinking about which sectors are most at risk from both COVID and from climate.
Yeah, fantastic, John. Stephen?
Just a reflection on what happened during the GFC, and that was, yes, we saw, as we're seeing at the moment, a reduction in carbon emissions due to suppressed economic activity. But what we saw in the immediate aftermath was that those emissions returned, in fact, exceeded pre-GFC in the first couple of years. So that would suggest that there was a lost opportunity in terms of how we responded to the GFC over a decade ago. And I hope that informs our leaders now that investing in, whether you want to call it a new Green Deal or Green New Deal, I should say, or going down the path such as the European Union has gone down. But the simple message is economic recovery and ongoing reductions in carbon emissions aren't mutually exclusive. They can be done in parallel, and I hope that's the roadmap, as it were, that I hope governments, particularly our government here in Queensland, will be putting in place.
Yep, thanks, Stephen. And I think it's really interesting. I mean, after the GFC, I think if you look at now the cost of renewables, particularly large scale renewables. The views that I get from a lot of companies is that actually it's the economic answer now for us. So I think it's probably in a different space than it was back in 2008, 2009. And it's actually now an economic argument. It's not just it's the right thing to do. So Sarah.
75% of future high growth jobs need STEM. Do we want to have high growth, high value, well-paid jobs in Queensland and Australia? 65% of them don't yet exist. Cleantech falls slap bang in the centre of all of this. So, what a great opportunity for us to be engaged. We live in, as I said before, we live in uncertain times. It's rather like COVID is exponential. I think the uncertainty's gone exponential. But it's meant that science and technology become much better accepted. It's amazing the number of people that wouldn't want to work from home and Zoom into meetings. Now we just all do it. It's an incredible time for us to be alive, where there's much more acceptance of the technology. The vaccine that's hopefully coming. Again, people getting to grips with the science of that, getting the grips of science of what COVID means. So I think we've got this incredible opportunity. Obviously, there's the challenges because people have, we're going to have quite a lot of unemployment. We're going to have jobs pressure, dollars pressure. Now, dollars not just even in individuals, but also from a government perspective. But if you look at government budgets, they're going to be completely swamped by health anyway. And now you add COVID and all the other pressures, it's going to be quite a challenge, which I think means we need to think about new jobs for everybody, because we need to make sure no one's left behind or we'll have civil unrest like we're seeing in the US. Governments are going to have to operate differently. We can't cope with the costs at the moment, so we're going to have to do that differently. And society, I think, is going to operate differently. Cleantech has some solutions for some of that. It has jobs, reduced prices, but also new ways of living. So I think we've just really got to use this as a strong opportunity to transform our economy. And as many voices as possible, I think, saying that. So Stephen, thanks for all that you're doing. As many voices as possible. Let's try and make the most of this really difficult time we're going through to actually be serious about transitioning.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, that's a great way to end, I think, Sarah, with that message, a really positive message. I would like to thank all of you. I'll hand back to Tiffany, but thanks to the audience. Thanks to you all for a really stimulating conversation. Sorry for anyone that asked a question, didn't get I tried to get through as many as we could. But back to you, Tiffany. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. I think we only missed one question after all that, so you did really well. So thank you to our panel, Sarah, John, Stephen, and also Paul. We really appreciate you sharing your insights with us today. And thank you to our audience for those great questions. There were some really good ones there. Just to note that our next webinar will take place on the 18th of June, discussing how our Cleantech innovators are preparing for the post-COVID-19 world. So something that came up today as well. And this will bring together a panel of innovators from across the different Cleantech sectors. So look out for that. Registrations are about to be open. So thank you once again, everyone, for watching Cleantech Conversations, and we look forward to seeing you next time.